get started. Father, thank you so much for being with us, allowing us to be here tonight. Thank you for the strength that you've given us to be here. Thank you for your word that gives us direction and helps us to understand you better, to understand humanity, to understand this world in which we live, this culture, even though we're removed hundreds and hundreds of years from what we'll be looking at tonight. We're thankful that you've preserved your word for us to give us that kind of understanding and direction. Lord, we're asking you to be with Marie and help her to continue to improve from this procedure, and that her surgery on this heart valve would go well, and they can schedule that soon for her. And little Amber Shea, we're thankful for her making improvement and continuing to grow and develop. Thank you for the good news with Brandon Forshaw as well. Asking you to be with Christine and with Kevin as they both are dealing with extreme pain, and that what they're trying to do and how to help and approach that would be very beneficial and strengthening for them. Open our eyes, Lord, and help us to see the wonderful things you have in store for us. We're praying in your word. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, we're going to be talking about one of the most tumultuous times in all of Israel's history, the time of the kings, the period of the kings. And a lot of what goes on in the kings, and reading through and studying the kings, just to be quite honest, is pretty confusing, because you read one king and the king of Judah, and then his kingdom is dated to the 4th year, the 10th year, the 30th year of this king of Israel, and so it's back and forth sometimes, and it really becomes a challenge to try to lay it out in a clear way. If I remember correctly in your book, I think on the last page, somebody flip there real quick if I didn't list the kings. So that's nothing from a scale standpoint of how long they reigned or ruled, but just to give you a listing. So sometimes when you're back and forth, and you're reading, and then of course, just to make it more interesting for us, you have somebody like Jeroboam the first and Jeroboam the second, and then how do we put that together, and where do we put them, and so on. So I'm trying to do that at least for you again. And what you'll see in your book really is more than anything else, is just kind of an expanded outline of 1st and 2nd Kings after we get through this first lesson. But the period that we'll start with is the Judges. We're going to look at this tonight. It kind of sets the stage for us. But the period of the Kings really incorporates about 500 years of history. So in the next 13 weeks, we're going to cover about 500 years of history. So you know it's just going to be a gloss. It's not going to be something we can get too deep in the weeds with on some of the things. But as I've titled this, is just some of the major events that we're going to specifically look at. The period of the Judges now is equally as disruptive as the period of the Kings. And sometimes we look at political power today. We look at our country today and we think it's a political powder keg, and any minute this is going to happen, and the whole country's going to just go to hell in a handbasket. It's just going to explode. Everything's going to be, if he gets in, if she gets in, this happens, that happens. And we tend to overly fret about what happens in our nation. And we sometimes think it couldn't get any worse. Well, all we have to do is glance at the Judges and glance at the time of the Kings, and this is mild, this is calm, this is unbelievably peaceful in correspondence to, or in relationship to, those times. Most of the times in biblical Israel and the other countries that existed around that time, violence, bloodshed, and most often death is what characterized the changing of monarch. It wasn't that there was a vote and, okay, this one won, and so now he moves in or she moves into office and everything just goes along. It was horrible. I mean, somebody might reign for a month and then he's killed. And somebody might reign for 55 years and then finally he dies and he passes the kingship on to his son. And that happens, and you will see all this kind of unfold before us. So that we're going to cover a lot and try to talk about a lot, but I also have the questions in your book so you can give some thought to it. If you look at the first page, I did put an outline, and I ask, and I'm hoping that you will do this ahead of time, is read before you come to class. Because we're just going to cover, I know that's asking a lot, Bob, but if you'll read before class, you'll come in and hopefully understand a little bit more, because we're not going to be able to read through all of these things in the class period. And I am hoping this will be a highly participatory class. That means I want your input as well. So hopefully we'll share in some of that. So we're going to study 1st and 2nd Kings. So of course, let's start in Judges chapter 9. Look in the 9th chapter, the book of Judges, because we need to lay some groundwork for kings. I entitled this, Israel Wants a King. And when we start out in the 9th chapter, we've just followed this great historical figure, Gideon, in the 8th chapter of the book of Judges. And I mean, there's just some great stories. This is boys' favorite stomping ground to read through Judges and the stories about what happened in the book of Judges. So in chapter 9, Gideon is gone. And it says, now Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, or Gideon, went to Shechem to his mother's relatives, and he spoke to them and the entire families of the household of his mother's father, saying, speak now in the hearing of all the leaders of Shechem. Which is better for you, for 70 men, all the sons of Jerubbaal, to rule over you, or for one man to rule over you? So Abimelech's posing a situation for them. Would you rather have 70 guys who are going to be your boss, or would you rather just have one guy? Who's the one guy? Me. Okay. So, do you want these 70 yahoos over there, or do you want me to be your king, your leader? So, he poses this to them. So, his mother's relatives, verse 3, spoke all these words on behalf of the hearing of all the leaders of Shechem, and they weren't inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is our relative. And so they gave him 70 pieces of silver from the house of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men, and they followed him. So, I mean, you start right out of the gates. This is our introduction to Abimelech. What kind of guy is he? Exactly. I mean, he's going to try to slide in any way he can, do whatever he can, create any kind of havoc. So he finally gets the nod. Okay, we'll follow you. So they give him 70 pieces of silver. I don't know if that's because it was the 70 sons. Each one gave him a piece of whatever. How that was specifically, we're not told. But he's given 70 pieces of silver, and he goes out and he hires the cream of the crop. No, the worthless and base fellows, okay? Men who he knows he can just get them to do what, they're mercenaries is what they are. And I'm going to hire mercenaries to go ahead and do whatever I'm asking them to do. And of course, worthless fellows like they are, they're willing to do it. Then he went to his father's house in Ophrah and killed his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men on one stone. And we think that our society sometimes is harsh. And we think sometimes it's just uncouth the way this is, or the way that is. And we've lost the dignity in it. Hey, I'm not arguing. Some of those things we certainly have in our country, in our political scheme today. But by comparison to this, it's nothing. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left because he hid himself, and all the leaders of Shechem and all Beth Milo assembled together, and they went and they made Abimelech the king by the oak of the memorial stone which was in Shechem. Now when they told Jotham, he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim, and he raised his voice and called out, and he said to them, listen to me, you leaders of Shechem, that God may listen to you. And he tells this story, this parable of trees, which we won't get all into today. We'll let Jeffrey teaches the book of Judges sometime, and he'll teach you all about it. So, but it's an interesting parable that develops in all of this. But they pronounce him as the king. Now, turn to verse 50. Your book, verse 50. Same chapter, Judges 9. Then Abimelech went to Thebes, and he camped against Thebes and captured it. But there was a strong tower in the city, in the center of the city, and all the men and women with all the leaders of the city fled there and shut themselves in, and they went up on the roof of the tower. So Abimelech came to the tower, fought against it, and approached the entrance of the tower to burn it down with fire. But a woman threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head, crushing his skull. You know, this is, here is this minor chord that's played now in the music as we watch this unfold. And now he lays there, and this happens to him. Then it says, verse 54, then he called out quickly to the young man, his armor bearer, and he said unto him, draw your sword and kill me, so that what?
The woman didn't do it.
So that nobody can say, a woman killed me. Okay. So what's his problem here?
Pride.
Among many. I mean, what's going on? Pride, okay, yeah, it's pride. What else? I mean, the guys that he hired before were worthless fellows. How do you characterize Abimelech? He's a worthless guy himself. I mean, he's not somebody who's an upstanding citizen in this regard, and yet he's so conniving and usurping of this situation. Now he is claimed to be the king. So I ask the question, why is Abimelech never considered to be the king of Israel? I mean, and he talk about it later when Israel's history goes on. Why is Abimelech never referenced as a king?
Well, he wasn't anointed, or, you know, like the other kings were, or chosen by God, or anything.
Okay, yeah, he was self-appointed.
Yeah.
Is what he did. He was
He's like-
conniving and a usurper. He comes in, takes the position, and they say, okay, you're our king. Okay, I mean, he's the one that posed this to them, remember? Do you want the 70 guys or do you want me? And they said, yeah, we want you. You can be our king. But God doesn't recognize him as a king, even though these people do. This pocket of people do. So let's leave that and we'll fast forward, turn with me to the book of 1 Samuel. We'll spend a little bit more time here in 1 Samuel. What do you know about Samuel before we go any further? What do you know about him? Okay, he spoke for God in the sense of being a prophet. What else do you know about him? Huh? Hannah's son. Okay, I didn't remember that, but yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Okay. Yeah, as a woman, I didn't need to remember her. So what? What else do you know?
He was given to her by God because she couldn't have a child, didn't
Okay.
have children.
Special fulfillment and all of that. And he's a judge. Okay, thanks. Good answer. All right. So he is the last of the judges, really. Samuel is. He doesn't appoint his sons. He's going to appoint his sons to be judges after him. Let's look at the first few verses of chapter 6. Chapter 8. And it came about that when Samuel was old, that he appointed his sons as judges over Israel. The name of the firstborn was Joel. The name of the second one was Abijah. And they were judging in Beersheba. His sons, however, did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after dishonest gain, and they took bribes, and they perverted justice. We might say they are worthless fellows like Abimelech's crew, okay? So, verse 4, then all the elders of Israel gathered together, and they came to Samuel at Ramah, and they said unto him, behold, you're old, you've grown old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint to us a king to judge us like all the nations. But this matter was displeasing in the sight of Samuel. He said it when they said unto him, give us a king to judge us. So here we have Samuel, who's a good and godly man. He judges Israel. Just for sake of the book of Judges, it's not necessarily one follows the next, follows the next, follows the next. And they weren't necessarily judges even over all of Israel. Sometimes they were judges in an area, there was overlapping, there was gaps. So sometimes people try to take the book of Judges and say, okay, it covers 300 or 450 years, I forget what is often said, but that's just when you add those all together, but there's gaps and overlap. So it's not necessarily a chronological accounting in the book of Judges, but here we do have the last judge, a good and godly man, Samuel. He appoints his sons, but his sons are not good and godly. So the people of Israel finally just say, we've had enough. We don't want your sons to be our judges. We don't want them to be our leaders. So we want you to appoint a king and make him the judge and the king over us, to rule over us. So it said displease Samuel. So just try to think in Samuel, if you're Samuel, and you're appointing your kids to follow in your steps, to be the next leader. And the people come up and they say, we don't want your kids. We want somebody else. So why is Samuel taking this person? I mean, why is it bothering Samuel? What might be the reason that would upset him?
Well, he feels like they've lost all confidence and trust in him, and here he served them all these years and done all this stuff for them.
Okay.
Now, he made the decision, this is the way to go, and, people have a good argument, but sometimes, you can't see the forest for the trees.
Okay, yeah, so personally, they're attacking, he may feel like they're attacking his own personal leadership. That they're not following me in what I've suggested. Wait,
It wasn't ordained by God.
these men being appointed, you mean? His sons?
Going with the king.
Oh, yeah, okay. Right, but yeah,
So he's
so,
upset over the fact that they
Sure.
weren't appointing king, and God has nothing to do with it.
yeah, they've turned away from God's plan. And he's angered by that, and he takes it to God. As far as why this would be. Also might be a little bit of, as a father,
Shame.
yeah, okay, I'm embarrassed because of how my sons have been acting, and these are my boys, okay? These are my sons. I don't like you thinking this way. I don't like you talking this way about my kids. I don't know what his reasoning is, but a lot of parents, they want their kids to follow in their footsteps. And here Samuel's his sons are not doing that. So who was Israel's first king, really? Oh, no. God. God was Israel's first king. So, well, look at this. Go ahead and read with me as he goes on. They said that, give us a king. Verse 7. And the Lord said to Samuel, listen to the voice of the people regarding all that they say unto you, because they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. God is Israel's king. And what are they saying to God?
We don't want you.
We don't want you. We want somebody else. Okay? And Samuel says, that's not right. That shouldn't be. He takes it to God, asks God. God says, go ahead and give it to him. Go ahead and do what they say. So it goes on and explains for us a little bit more. They've not rejected you, they've rejected me. Verse 8, like all the deeds which they have done since the day that I brought them out of Egypt, even to this day, in that they have abandoned me and served other gods, so they are doing to you as well. So what does God say to Samuel in essence? Huh? Yeah, give it to them, but get over it, okay? They've been doing this all along. You're nobody special. They've been treating me like this ever since they left Egypt. And so it's not you, Samuel. Don't take this personally in that regard. So it says, now then, listen to their voice, but, verse 9, notice, listen to their voice, but warn them strongly, and tell them of the practice of the king who will reign over them. So God says, go ahead, give them a king, but what? Tell them what it's going to be like. Okay? And so Samuel doesn't mince words when he tells them how it's going to be and what's going to happen to them. So, let's stop and think maybe a minute here. What would be attractive to the Israelites about having a king other than, or in addition to, we just don't want your boys because they're worthless. But what other reasons might they want a king?
They wanted to be like the nations around them.
Okay, we want to fit in and just kind of blend in like everybody else. We want to be like everyone else. All these other nations have kings. We don't have a king. Not a king that we can look at like that. And so maybe there's some pomp and circumstance that goes with kings and royalty, and they wanted to have that as well. What else can you think of?
Absentee leadership. God is not there.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, he's not walking around amongst them like a king will walk around amongst them.
Right, I can't see him, can't put my hands on him.
I can't talk to him, I can't, all those things that are trappings
Right.
in their mind, it's their leadership.
Right, because here's this other nation, and look at this guy, he's in a robe, he rides in a fancy chariot, he's got white horses to pull his whatever. We don't have that. And so there's an absence of that, it's empty around us. So this is all that's going on. Samuel's upset. God says, go ahead and do it. Look at verse 10. So Samuel spoke all the words of the Lord to the people who had asked for a king, and he said unto them, this will be the practice of the king who will reign over you. Okay, so look how good this is going to be. He says, he will take your sons and put them in his chariots for himself and among his horsemen, and they will run before his chariots. He will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and some will do his plowing and gather to his harvest and make him weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will also take your daughters, use them for perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields, your vineyards, and your olive groves, and give them to his servants. And he will take a tenth of all of your seed and of your vineyards, and give it to his high officials and his servants. He will also take your male servants and your female servants, and your best young men and your donkeys, and use them for his work. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his servants. Then you will cry out on the day because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you on that day. And the people said, oh my, don't do that. No, that's not what they said. The next verse, look at what it says. Yet the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel, and they said, no, but there shall be a king over us.
Jerry,
So-
did you comment on verse 9, changing to Saul's heart? That seems to me sort of significant. Would you comment on that? Verse 9, that God changed Saul's heart for the better, for the worse.
Chapter 8, verse 9.
No, chapter 10.
Chapter 10
9.
and verse 9.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought that's where you were.
No, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Okay.
my apologies.
That's okay. So, I'm in 8 still. That goes back to Jeffrey, because he'll be teaching judges at some point
Oh,
in
he's
the future.
prepared. He's learned about
Okay, okay, yeah, that's, so,
And I don't have the answer.
so in 1 Samuel chapter 8, anybody that would like to join us there, so,
My page is stuck together.
no, that's okay. Yeah, mine do too sometimes there. But all right, so Samuel tells them how it's going to be. He's going to take your sons, your daughters. He's going to tax you. He's going to put them in service. He's going to do all of these things to you and to your family and to all that you have. And all this is going to happen. And you're going to cry out on that day and say, oh, we don't want a king. And God's going to say what? Too late. I'm not going to listen to this. Okay? So, can you think of any other similar occasion in your life or biblically where the same thing happens as happened here?
What about the golden calf? Moses, now they couldn't see him anymore, and they wanted to be like everybody else, have something to
Okay.
see to worship.
Okay, yeah, and they had just come out of Egypt, so that really made sense to them. Make us, and then we threw the golden fire and poof, out jumped this cat. This is how they made it sound. So, what else can you think of?
People always want to vote for what they want, it doesn't matter what year it is,
Okay, yeah, what I put in my notes
no
here.
matter what they have to pay for it.
Yeah, I put in my notes, every time we sin willfully, I mean, every time that I knowingly sin, I'm doing exactly what happened here. Because God says, don't go down this road, because if you do, this is what's gonna happen. And I say, yeah, but I'm gonna go down that road. And And so do you. That's what happens when we sin willfully and we decide to do something. Here he says, this is what's gonna happen, this is what's gonna be like. You're not gonna like it, it won't be it. And we say, yeah, I wanna go down that dark road. I wanna follow that, I wanna end up in that spot. I mean, we don't actually say it, hopefully, we don't actually say it, but that is what we're saying. When we choose to just willfully do the opposite of what God said. And so, here's what it is, it's gonna be this bad, it's gonna be just like this. And so, they said, no, we wanna do it anyway. So, verse 20, so that we also may be like all the other nations, and our king may judge us. And look, this goes back to what William said, he will go out before us. So we're gonna see him, here he is. But also, what's the king gonna do? He's gonna fight our battles. It almost sounds like we won't have to do anything. So we appoint this guy, we got a king, everything's good. And so, he goes on to say, now, after Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the Lord's hearing. And the Lord said to Samuel, listen to their voice and appoint a king for them. So Samuel said to the men of Israel, maybe I'm wrong, but just the way this reads, the very last line of chapter 8, go every man to his city. Just go home, okay? Just get out of here. Is almost what it sounds like. Okay? I'm tired of you. I told you it's going to be right. You decided you're going to do it anyway, but okay, fine, but just go home now. And he sends every man home to his city. So, that's how this king idea comes up. Okay? We want to have a king so we can be like the other nations. We don't want your sons anymore to be judges over us. We want a king to be like the other nations. Now that almost sounds like, as you read this, it almost sounds like this is just history that was never thought of, never planned on, or anything else. So with that in mind, turn back to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 17. Deuteronomy chapter 17. Now, what's the book of Deuteronomy all about? Who knows what the word Deuteronomy means?
It's the second reading of the law.
Yeah, second law. So it just means the law second time, second law. So this is the law given about 38 and a half years after it was given the first time at Mount Sinai. They're just ready to go into the promised land. The period of wandering is over. They're basically knocking on the door to go into the land. And God says, okay, we have a whole new generation here. And so I want you to give them the law so they know what the law is. And that, therefore, it is the second law, or the second giving of the law. So in chapter 17, and if you'll drop down to verse 14, God says, when you enter the land, see, they haven't gotten into Israel, they haven't gotten into Canaan yet. When you enter the land, which the Lord your God is giving you, and you take possession of it and live in it, and you say, I will appoint a king over me like all the nations who are around me. So, seems to me like God knew this was going to happen, right? He knew exactly it was going to happen. So when you get into the land and you say, hey, we want a king to be like all the other nations around me, you shall in fact appoint a king over you whom the Lord your God chooses. One from among your countrymen, you shall appoint a king over yourselves. You may not put a foreigner over yourselves, anyone who is not of your countrymen. In any case, he is not to acquire many horses for himself, nor shall he make the people return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said, you shall never again return this way. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, so that his heart does not turn away, nor does he greatly increase silver and gold for himself. Now, as you're hearing this, does anybody come to mind?
Solomon.
Doesn't it sound like he is just absolutely writing Solomon's testimony? And he's writing this, I mean, so many years ahead of time. This is they're getting ready to go into the land. Haven't had the period of the judges yet. We haven't had Saul, we haven't had David, and we haven't had Solomon yet. And it sounds like he's giving Solomon's history. And he says, now it shall come about that when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself a copy of this law on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priest. And it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, so that he will learn to fear the Lord his God by carefully following all the words of this law and these statutes, so that his heart will not be haughty toward his countrymen, and that he will not turn away from the commandment to the right or to the left, so that he and his sons may live long in his kingdom in the midst of Israel. So God says, okay, you're going to ask for a king, and so I'm going to make provisions for you now before this king comes about. When you ask for a king, here's the kind of person he needs to be. He can't be a foreigner. He has to be one of your own countrymen. He can't be somebody who's going to take you back to Israel, back to Egypt. He's going to be somebody who is satisfied with God's arrangement in the marital relationship. He's not going to acquire a whole harem of wives. He's not going to acquire all this wealth for himself. But what will he do? What is the purpose, and how is he characterized in those last few verses?
He's gonna follow the law of God, if he'll meditate on that every day.
So yeah, he's going to sit on the throne, and he's going to write for himself a copy of the law in front of the Levitical priest. Okay, so the Levitical priest bring the law to him, and he is going to write a copy of the law for himself to have, so that he can read that and study that and meditate on it. Okay, but
Well, it sounds like the picture of a servant leader, someone that's humble and someone that's, following God and doing what they're supposed to be. Well, David certainly wasn't perfect, but more like David and Saul.
okay, sure. And if you think about this, if this king would do just what he says in these last few verses, that he sat on the throne and he wrote for himself a copy of the law day by day by day, and then he meditated on that law day by day by day, and he was of the character that he's already talked about, what kind of kingdom would he reign over in Israel? What kind of king would he be? Yeah, a strong, powerful reign and monarch. And then, as it goes on to say, that he would live long and he would pass this on to his sons. So God sees forth the idea of a monarchy going on. If this man lives the kind of good and godly life that he should, doing these things, then he passes that on to his kids. And, I mean, imagine what Israel would look like if this is how their kings characterize themselves. So take a half step and imagine, what would this country look like if our leaders did this same kind of thing? And they thought they took their position of authority, whether in the state or at the national level, local level, and they said, this is a tremendous responsibility I have. I need God's help. And so I'm going to, every day, I'm going to read one chapter of the book of Proverbs. Okay? He's going to gain a lot of wisdom if he were to do that. And just, or her, he or she. But this picture is such a different picture than what we tend to think. We tend to think that the king just poof, out of the ground, came up, and it's like, okay, what are we going to do now? God already had provisions there. He already knew what was going to happen. So turn to the 28th chapter of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 28. And for you who are good Bible students, there's 2 chapters in the Old Testament. Leviticus chapter 26 and Deuteronomy chapter 28. Those 2 chapters are pivotal to understanding the whole Old Testament. Over and over and over and over again. When you're reading through the prophets, which of course is the bulk of the Old Testament, you read Isaiah, Jeremiah, all the minor prophets, Ezekiel, Daniel, you read these, what they're writing, they're citing and referencing Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy chapter 28 over and over and over and over again. Because these are the blessings and the curses that come upon the people of Israel if they'll follow God. If you follow God, blessing. If you turn away from God, curses. It's clearly laid out. So, chapter 28, verses 36 and 37. It says, the Lord will bring you and your king, whom you appoint over you, to a nation that neither you nor your fathers have known. And there you shall serve other gods made of wood and stone, and you will become an object of horror, a song of mockery, and an object of taunting among all the peoples where the Lord drives you. So God said, look, if your king turns away from me, then you're going to be driven away from this land. And that's exactly what happens to Israel. Israel goes off into Assyrian captivity. Years later, Judah, the better nation, the southern nation, they go off into Babylonian captivity. And they are dispersed among the people exactly as God said was going to happen. So part of those curses would come if and when they turned away from God, just exactly like Deuteronomy says. Okay, let's say you have a question or thought or anything on that up to this point.
So David and Solomon both violated God's law about many wives.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as far as the king goes, yeah. That was never in God's design. Anything else? All right, so look at this next section, and we'll just quickly cover this because we only have 6 minutes. But so there's some examples of other nations with kings. We said they wanted to have a king so they'd be like the other nations. Okay, we can go all the way back to the book of Genesis, chapter 14. Won't read all this. You can read any and all this, of course, on your own. There's the War of the 9 Kings that goes on there. They're listed where they're from, who they are. In verses 18 through 20, we're introduced to an interesting figure, Melchizedek. He is a very unique and interesting figure. He is king and priest. He's going to be referenced in the book of Hebrews as a foreshadowing of Christ and his role and who he is. So I asked the question in your book there, how or in what way is Melchizedek greater than Abraham? I mean, Abraham was the father of the Israelite nation. How is he greater than Abraham? Because the scripture tells us that he is.
Well, Abraham paid homage to him and sacrificed to him, so in Abraham's mind, he was greater.
Okay, yeah, anybody, the lesser pays tithes or pays homage to the greater. And Melchizedek receives that from Abraham. And so that's the very argument that's used here in the book of Genesis and also in the book of Hebrews, that he's on that. Then in Genesis chapter 36, verses 31 to 39, the kings of Edom are listed. And in verse 34, and this is just extra credit, okay, for these show-offs that we have in the class. Husham is said to be from Teman. So who else do you know is from Teman? Exactly. Yes, sir. Okay, you get an extra credit for that. Extra credit for Bob. Yeah, Eliphaz the Temanite. Exactly. He is from Teman. So I just throw those out there just for free.
That's impressive.
And also, in the book of Habakkuk, chapter 3 and verse 3, just for another, this is really, if you're on Jeopardy, you do have this opportunity, okay, that it says God came from Teman. And you just think, God came from Teman. That sounds odd, doesn't it? Okay, but God came from Teman. Well, the word Teman means south, so God came from the south as he was coming through in the book of Habakkuk is what that's referencing. All right, so it's over and over again, but just look at the bottom there, the United Kingdom. This is just super easy way to remember it. The United Kingdom, each king, just for your benefit, reigned only 40 years, so you only have to remember one number, okay? Saul reigned 40 years, David reigned 40 years, Solomon reigned 40 years. You can find their appointments in those 3 chapters that I mentioned, 1 Samuel 9, 1 Samuel 16, 1 Kings chapter 1. So how would you describe Saul in the beginning, before he is the king? Do you remember?
Well, they said he was very taller than everybody else.
Okay.
Looked like a king, had all those similarities.
Okay. Okay, he was a lot like me, you're saying. No, so he stood head and shoulders above the others. He was somebody who looked stately, looked like a king, okay? And so when his name comes up,
He's hiding.
he's hiding. Yeah, he seems to be very much a reluctant leader. It says he's hiding among the baggage or among the all of the equipment over here. And so he's finally has to almost be dragged out to be said, okay, you're going to be the king. And it's like, oh man, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't ask for this. You know, I mean, he doesn't seem like a power-hungry individual at this point. So as he goes on, how about his kingship? How is he as a king pictured?
Bad.
Yeah, I mean, he becomes this, seems very prideful of who he is, what he can accomplish, what I'm going to do on my own, regardless of what God has said or what God has told me to do. And so it ends up in him refusing to heed the words of God via Samuel. In fact, he blames the people and said, well, it's those people. You know, they're the ones who did this, and they are the ones who did that. So how did Saul feel about David?
Jealous.
Exactly. Yeah, jealous of, tried to kill him on several occasions. We know that. So how would you describe David?
And after God's own heart.
Yeah, God would say that same thing. And yet, don't we struggle when we think about David sometimes? I mean, we don't. Just so we're clear, David's wasn't his only mistake to commit adultery with Bathsheba. That stands out. He also tries to get her husband drunk. He also tries to have deception involved, that he'll go home and he'll think, well, he'll impregnate his wife, he'll think it's his, okay? And that doesn't work, and so he essentially has him killed. I mean, it's a murder plot in reality. But that's not all that there is with David. David does some other things that you read through and think, what in the world is David doing here? Okay? But what I'm, I guess, encouraged by is that God looks not at the individual actions of each and every day, and you're in, you're out, with him, but he says, David's a man after my heart. When David is convicted of his sin, just take some time to read a few of the Psalms and just see that he is absolutely a broken man before God. And so God, I think, looks at the character of our life and judges the character of our life rather than, and I think the picture is sometimes that we fall in and out of grace every time we sin, every time we mess up. I don't think we can live that way myself. I don't want to be caught in some sin when I die. Don't get me wrong. But I think God looks at the character of who we are, our life, and what we're trying to be. He sees that better than I can see it and anybody else. But he looks at the character of David and he says, this is a man after my heart. And yet we think, what? David? And he says, yeah, he is a man after my heart. So what we'll do next week is we're going to start out, if you're looking at your handout just real quick and I'll let you go. If you'll read the first 11 chapters of the book of 1 Kings, it's just going to kind of set the stage for all the tumultuous times of the divided kingdom, as we often reference that. So appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you for your input, and you may now pass out.